So we're back on my plug life. I was doing a little research lately trying to find out how we help companies and individual people transition over to electrification. Now, we would do this in various ways, company-wide, but as well as the individual, we'd say give $5,000 off the price of an electric vehicle when you buy one. That sounds great, right? But I wanted to compare this to the fossil fuel industry, and this is where I ran into some problems. Now, when I look up websites, as I do, I look at a bunch of different ones and try to compare them and come up with a good series of numbers which would make some sort of sense. So I found one website that said in 2015, Canada subsidied $60 billion. That's a lot of money. Then I found another website that said in 2014 it was 71 million. So how do we get that much difference? How does people define a subsidy? So I went to Webster's Dictionary and looked up what they said a subsidy was. They said it's a grant or a gift of money, such as a grant by a government to a private person or a company to assist an enterprise deemed advantageous to the public. For example, if you had a factory and it was shutting down and you could continue working if you had a little bit of help, the government would help you out. For example, if you said, oh, we aren't making cars anymore, and the government said, well, we want to keep those 3,000 jobs there, what can we do to help? And you say, well, we could make electric cars instead. We just need help. That's basically what happened lately with the government offering billions of dollars to help that factory continue. But they're not just writing a check. What they're doing is they're saying, well, buy a bunch of tools, send us the bill, we'll pay for some of that. Maybe we'll take some taxes off over a period of time. So it's not like the money is just being handed over. There's a reason to this. And with the fossil fuel industry, the way they do it is a very similar way, but as well as they also have to pay money for drilling it out of the ground. They have to pay a royalty on oil and gas. So that could be ignored as well in various ways to make up the amount of money they would need to continue business. Now, in Alberta, there is a lot of moving back and forth whether people are working or not. Changes with the season, changes with the prices. For example, 1.6 billion aid package was announced December 2018. Now, this was due to Canadian oil prices being too low, so they wanted to keep people working, so they diverted all this money to help them out. Now, a bit of a problem with this is there's no real information on who got what. The government says it was spent, but we don't exactly know where. And this is sort of the problem I'm going to talk about a lot in this, is this information is very well obfuscated, or it's all over the place and it's not all together. Nobody really knows what's going on here. So I can't come up with a good enough number for you guys, and this is kind of upsetting to me. So Catherine McKenna, the Minister of Infrastructure and Community, said that we've eliminated all of the fossil fuel subsidies at the federal levels, and that was in June 2020, which sounds great. So they're not doing anything, right? Okay, let's look at the provinces then. Now, the provinces I found in 2013 to 2015, Alberta gave $1.16 billion during that time, and BC did $271 million. Now, this is a big number. There are other industries that we do subsidies for as well, like in BC, like 20% of our subsidies are to the movie industry, which is much higher than the oil and gas industry, but it is still a big number. And do we really need to help them out all that much? But we're thinking about the jobs here, right? So let's try to get the numbers again. The numbers say, well, there's a company out there that's looking at all the G7 companies trying to compare electrification and how we're going on that avenue. So they're trying to find information, and they came back and said that Canada doesn't publish specific reports on fiscal support for fossil fuels, and it doesn't have a plan to phase out support for oil and gas industry. And since Canada is the largest provider of fiscal support per GDP of the G7, this is a problem. Now, we don't really support the coal industry. It's not really a thing here, so that's fine. But the fossil fuel industry, there's so many different companies, it kind of gets lost in the paperwork. We hear a big number, but we don't know what's going where. I looked up lately the last ones that got funding. 2016 is the one I could find. Looked at the list of all the different people that are getting subsidies. Number one was an $86 million going to Chrysler. Okay. The next two on my list were to biotech. So that's where they're taking biomass, stuff that can't be burned in landfills, for example, and burning it for energy. But to find an oil industry on that list was really far down. Like I said, there's so many of them. As a total, it's a lot. But the individual ones are very hard to find, and this is part of the problem. So let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum. Let's see what these defenders are talking about. So there was a report done by the IISD that says $16 billion was aid given for the pandemic response. Now, of course, pandemic is still going on. So this is an amount of money that was supposed to help out with what was going on with the oil and gas industry, specifically fossil fuel subsidies. Now, they make a big long list of what goes to what, and it sounds like a big title. Most people aren't going to read all the way through, but some people do. And a company did, and they found out that there were some questionable things on this list that were considered fossil fuel subsidies. Tell me, what do you think? Do you think these are supposed to be on that list? One of them is highway and bridge replacements in Ontario. That was $1.9 billion. There was a highway bridge improvements in Alberta for $234 million. There was a stimulus to create highway projects in Manitoba. There was funding lost revenues for aviation industry in the Yukon. That was like $10 million. There's a reduction in vehicle registration fees in Manitoba. So this is where people weren't driving as much, so they weren't signing new vehicles up. That was $8 million given towards that. There was purchase of natural gas plants in Ontario for power production. That was $2 billion. There was a waiving of the rent for ground leases for 21 airports. That's $242 million. So this isn't, as far as I'm concerned, directly tied into the fossil fuel industry. It's not like they couldn't produce oil because of these. They couldn't create gasoline or petrol, whatever, because of these issues. But it was all kind of lumped in together to make this $16 billion. So it's all coming down to what you consider to be that subsidy. I would love to just throw out a big number and say this is what Canada does, and this is what it's costing us individually or Canada-wide. Unfortunately, that number I can't really nail down. And remember at the beginning when I talked about that $60 billion, what that really comes down to is they're saying that $60 billion is what's costing us Canadians for the fossil fuel industry. And the way that number comes up, it's the amount of money that we would have to have set aside for stuff like oil spills. If companies have an oil spill, they tend not to clean it up entirely, or maybe they'll go bankrupt and now the oil's stuck on the ground and nobody's cleaning it up. We have to cover that cost. If they want to look for new wells, we're subsidizing that. So we're paying that cost. If people are having breathing problems because of all the pollution, we're paying for that, not the oil company. Replacing roads, replacing, like, all this stuff is that $60 billion. If we look end to end, we had no fossil fuels at all, we'd be saving that money Canada-wide. Unfortunately, it's not really a realistic number. We're not going to see that as a one-time pay and then we're better. So it's kind of hard to quantify really what it is costing us at the end of the day. But what I do know is that we really need to move away from this. This is the goal. This is what we're trying to do with electrification. And I'm hoping the government can responsibly invest their money to help us get there, so we don't have all these external costs that we're going to have to pay later with the loss of environment and health for all the citizens. And I certainly hope that I can convince as many people as I can to get into electrification so we can get away from all this dino fuel and back onto our lives like my plug life. I'll see you in the next video.